Hello there, friends. Andrew with the Bangs here. Welcome back to She Wonders Why. This is part 2 of the James Lindsay interview. So we were able to move on from talking about Twitter to finish up the discussion on the Confederate flag. And then we have a really interesting discussion on culture. Now, Jim talks a lot about critical race theory, of course, because that's what he's focusing on. But I found it rather refreshing to discuss his perspective of culture and ways forward as a nation, how to come together. We were able to even talk a little bit about Canada and race relations there, or cultural relations there, you could say. And we ended off on a pretty positive note. So thank you for watching the previous interview. If you haven't, I will make sure to put a link in the description. Have a look at Jim and Helen's latest book called Cynical Theories. And if you are new to my channel, please do not forget to subscribe. Without further ado, here is James Lindsay. I think
you will not like the other.
Okay, what's the other reason? What's the last one?
All right, so I don't say this as a reason why people should fly the flag. So I want to make it more clear. I said that there are 3 reasons that people could give that are valid reasons for themselves. Okay. I don't like this reason, but I think people need to understand it. I really wish, in fact, the entire conversation would listen to this point. When the Southerners say it's heritage, not hate, okay? And then the left comes around and says, because it's always somebody on the left that says this, heritage of slavery, heritage of racism. It's like, ugh, you didn't listen. You didn't talk. What's the heritage? And if you actually ask Southerners who actually think this way, they will tell you the Confederate flag for them is a symbol of sovereignty. You say, oh, you could fly a different flag. Yeah, I know they do. That yellow one with the snake on it means the same thing. Exactly the same thing. It doesn't include the racism part of the Confederacy. I get that. However, the point is, when the Southerner says it's heritage, not hate, and they talk about sovereignty with the Confederate flag, they say, and I think there's something to be heard when they say it, and I'm not saying I agree with them. I'm saying there's something to hear when they say it, that the purpose of the Civil War, they say it wasn't about slavery. I think they're wrong. Just to be clear, they say it was about an outside group, meaning the North, not the South. Even though it's one country, it was still a different sector of the country coming in and saying, you have to change because we said so. And they wanted that self-determination.
That kind of sounds like point number 2, but in the moment for them
similar.
Back then.
Yes, but on a much grander scale. And so what it was, what the Confederate flag symbolizes is, to many Southerners, is not a heritage of racism. It is a heritage of saying nobody else gets to tell us who we are and how we have to be. That's what they mean by it. And now I didn't say that it's a good thing to fly the flag. All I said is people should hear it. People should understand that that's what they mean and not say, no, it's just racism. And you can say, well, people are going to interpret it as racist, and I agree. I actually agree with that completely. And I say that people will lose their minds when they find this out, but it's just a fact, so they could find it out eventually.
Okay, but the self-determination part is to be self-determined to continue their way of life, which was holding slaves.
They tend to elide that point a little bit. That's, you see, I agree with you on that point.
I just need to go through it. I know that I'm not arguing with you about this.
No, I hear you. You're arguing with Southerners by proxy.
Yeah, well, but I have family. I said I have family. I have literally, okay, I say literally, I don't know where it is, but I have somewhere in the house a photocopy of an ancestor of mine, like signing, promising to never commit treason against the United States ever again, promising President Lincoln that he wouldn't. I mean, talking about guilt by association, I have family.
My family's from the North.
Yeah, I have family who fought in the South, and another one who fought in the Alamo. But
I'm not a Southerner by blood.
I am.
I only have one Southern ancestor.
Well, I am, and they were very proud Southerners, and I have family who say these things you're saying. For point number 3.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is, My problem is that people aren't hearing. People aren't able to have the conversation.
Okay.
So you're going to have some people that are going to do certain things. And when they say, see, the principle of sovereignty can supersede and leave behind that which it was attempting to claim sovereignty to maintain, right? So the principle of sovereignty can remain. So the symbol of the Confederate flag can become nobody else gets to tell us how we're going to be without any additional part saying what the how to be is. And many Southern people who I will vouch are, as far as anybody can tell, maybe they hide it really, really well, but as far as anybody can tell, they are certainly not racist individuals, understand both the Civil War and the Confederate flag in those terms. Then some people I know still call it the War of Northern Aggression. They see it as the South had its way of life and the North decided to come in and impose
I know,
a
I
new
can't
set of
get
rules.
past that. Okay, what was that way of life again?
Well, I'm with you on that. It's like, but here's the thing. If you want to have that conversation with them, right? This is my actual point on this third point, this third issue. If you want to get to that part of the conversation with them and get them to have any chance of agreeing with it, you better understand the sovereignty part.
Okay, to give them their point and then to be like, but here's that little chink in that armor. Like there's
I mean, if you want to put it in a like an adversarial way, yeah. But if you don't, it's just listen. I understand you on the sovereignty point. Now you're right. There is a reason for sovereignty, and I'm just curious. Do you see the other side of this? Do you see why people?
I don't think I was being adversarial. Like me,
especially. Yeah, you were the adversarial one.
Yeah, of the two of us after this interview, they're gonna be like, "Whoa, man, that Jim Lindsay. I see his points." And Andrea, I thought she was the peaceful type. But whoa.
They're going to hear that I said the Confederate flag is good, and they're going to come burn my house down.
No.
Which I didn't even say that.
No, you didn't say that. I know you're going through you're going through if you were talking with someone who was, you've had this conversation before, I'm guessing.
Oh God, a few times, many times. And so it's frustrating to me because I just watch people talk past each other. Yeah. Where I know, because I've talked to the Southerners that fly the flag, and I say, don't, that's totally valid. Isn't it the same symbol as the Gadsden flag, the yellow one with the snake? And they're like, yep. And I'm like, do you really have to fly the one that kind of pisses other people off? They're like, not really. But they say I can't. So then they go back to the other reason. And so you can kind of see what it's just a self-fulfilling. If everybody was like, yeah, sometimes people fly the Confederate flag and this is what they believe by it, and way fewer people would fly Confederate flag.
Okay, I get the giving it power by going on about it. Like I do get that. But then I also get the, well, you don't have to be. It does feel very petulant to me. Because they said I can't.
Well, it can be. It can be. Sometimes it's petulance, and sometimes it's standing up for a principle. And those two things, there may be a very fine or fuzzy line between them.
Well, whenever slavery is involved, it's pretty. That's the end. That's the end of it. But
I mean.
But okay, I get where you're. We don't have anyone to convince. You and I are already like, no, we don't need to fly it. Like, done. Like, I get it. I get where you're coming from. And people watching, let us know, I guess, what you think. But
where I'm coming from is that there is a fraught conversation that makes the problem worse.
Okay, people don't respond to shame.
Yes,
people don't respond to being shamed very well. So I get that.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, they changed their handle on Twitter to retweeted by the president.
Yeah, so everyone just be nicer to Jim and stop telling him what to do.
No, I love it. I'm trolling those assholes.
I hate it. No, don't troll Jim. Sorry, James Lindsay. I'm talking to James Lindsay.
It drives them crazy.
I have a question about this.
Okay, no, I have a question for you first.
Okay, I'm gonna hold on to mine.
Do you or do you not like my profile picture? No, I don't mean that in some inappropriate way.
I actually really don't like it at all.
And the reason is?
Because I hate the crotch shot, man. It's not.
So you hate the crotch shot, but what do you think of the fact that they always take my profile picture? They say
Okay, I
something,
know
and then
you're
some blue
trolling them
check
with the
person
picture.
just replies with a picture of my freaking men spreading crotch.
I
Why do you
don't.
think my picture
I think that the long tie is funny. I don't
long
like.
ties on?
I'm kind of like. I'm kind of like all prudish, or I'm like, close those legs, like.
Oh, I can't.
Okay, I'm
Oh,
sorry. I'm
I
sorry,
can't.
man. I know you're
I'm
looking for
mansplaining
another answer.
right now, Andrea.
Is it
Have to.
because you just love it that people hate it? So you, this is what you, it's answer number 2. You're like, oh, they hate it, so I'm gonna leave it
Well,
up.
it's a number of things. So it is that, but there's also that it's you're not supposed to manspread, so I have to manspread.
Okay, but
But
I
then
liked the karate one. Like if it was that one, I would have been like, no, I love that one.
I love that. They made fun of that one too.
I know, but I liked that
no.
one because it wasn't obscene. It's just because I'm like a prude. I'm like, don't be like.
I told you I'm a liberal. Russell and Jimmy's doing
I'm
things
usually
right
not
outside
super
of the.
conservative,
But no, there's
but
another
I just
thing,
can't
right?
handle the man's legs being like, hey, look at these ladies. Like this.
They're like that right now.
Okay, well, good. I can't see it though. That's okay.
But I would stand up, but then I wouldn't be doing it. So the other though is that I will confess my favorite thing in the world. They're like, Jim, are you ever happy? No, I'm not. So very few things outside of the sacred marriage make me happy. Very few things.
Okay, and I believe you.
One of them is I am a absolute connoisseur of the absurd.
Okay.
And the fact that I made that my profile picture is absurd.
So that's like your thing. That's a very you thing.
That's right. I think it's hilarious. I look at my own picture and laugh. It cracks me up.
That's your thing. That's like your weird ism then. Like the you know, it's like, oh, I love the absurd. So
one of my rules on social media is that you don't put anything on social media that you're not willing to see made fun of.
Yeah, I should.
And so I put things that I make fun of myself.
Okay.
And I do it making fun. Like I'm making fun. Do you know the story behind the manspreading picture?
I heard it. I actually listened to the Joe Rogan interview you did like 2 months ago.
Yes, my dear friend Pamela took a picture of me in the I was very, very mindful because there's that video. People made fun of me. It was horrible. I'm manspreading to like the maximum degree. Yeah. It's like, holy smokes, that's bad. And it became made fun of, and I started to laugh about it. And I was like, manspreading is like a brand for me. It's funny. It's hilarious. I just can't stop laughing about it. And so I'm telling this story in London in this conference, and like literally one of the fanciest rooms in the world.
Okay.
I mean, that room was absurdly fancy. So like
it was the juxtaposition of where you were and what you were doing.
Well, everything, yeah, it's all I am a postmodernist at heart in the sense of the parts that are beautiful of it. And so I was very like distractedly mindful of keeping my legs close together. And then I was telling this story on a panel. The other person's leg, if you look at the pictures, Mike Nanas, he's sitting right next to me. And I said, so I'm being really mindful of my legs because I'm always guilty of manspreading, and I spread my legs open. Picture. It said to me, I'm laughing in the picture because I'm laughing at myself. It's just beautiful to me that
because you know the story.
The image of who I am. I'm laughing at myself.
But then people don't know your background story to it.
But I'm fine with that. It's hilarious. I don't care about my brand. We keep coming back to that point.
No.
I think brand is part of the poison. It's all like, what do I talk about all the time?
Authenticity. Okay, that's okay. So I try to be as authentic as I can as on Twitter.
You just said that you're way more.
I know, to the point where I try to tell my Twitter followers, I'm not as nice as I seem. You guys, please understand that. And they're like, nah. They won't even let me. Like I try to be like closer to myself by saying, okay, well, I didn't blow up on Twitter, but like I just like yelled at my kids just like, 10 minutes ago. So don't have me on a pedestal, haha. And then they're like, nah, you're just making yourself more delightful. Like, and it's not like, and then I'm like, okay, I can't do anything about this. It's just, they're going to see what they want to see. Like, people actually don't like me if I tweet like a dick joke or something because they're like, Andrea,
jokes?
you're innocent. Like, they don't want me to be that.
It is time
like,
for, you have dick jokes?
Well, there are some like jokes that, not jokes, but like stories that like I say that people are like, not innocent little Andrea, and I'm just like, I'm an adult woman who's married for 10 years and has 3 children. I can be dirty if I want, you know. So I have people who don't want me to be a certain way, and it might be joking. I don't know if they're joking or not. But like, I do get the people wanting you to be a certain way, and I don't push back against that purposely, but I don't apologize for it. But I also am like, well, I can do this. It's fine, but it's all in good fun. It's always my friends. So for you, okay, here's my question. So here, or concern, I should say. What you're like, I'm gonna do this. I don't care about how it looks, because this is what the message needs to be. But what about the people you might be pushing away who would maybe listen, but they chose not to because of your persona?
That's okay.
What if it's more people than it would have been? You don't know.
That's also okay. I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I don't want to be everybody's cup of tea. And the last thing I want to do is become beholden to an audience by being somebody I'm not, and then having to be held to the standards of people that then lead you in one direction or another. And seeing how many freaking MAGA people I've picked up, I'm really glad that I don't act on Twitter in a way where I'm beholden to an audience, because I've just gained like 70,000 right-wing people, half of whom are, I don't know if it's half, some percentage of whom tweet properly horrifying things to me that I have to block when I see them. Mm-hmm. And if I were beholden to that audience or trying to build just in terms of numbers and reaching people, no bueno. Now, I know I lose a lot of people on the annoying left, which is the zone that I consider somewhere between the social justice people and then normal people on the center left. There's the annoying left. These people care what brand hot dog you're eating every time you eat one. They're just too concerned. They're the one who, you get together for a picnic and somebody brought a bucket of chicken and they're like, I don't eat fast food. And you're like,
okay.
Oh, yeah, you're on the annoying left. I got it. Okay. Yeah. Those people can something you would censor out.
So you're not concerned about, but you're not worried about them ideologically, though. You're like, oh, I don't
Andrea,
need to be there for them.
I am not worried about.
You say you want to use these people as foils to make your point. Well, if you didn't care about making a point, to me. What?
See, this is a problem. I'm like, I don't want to come off like this is arrogant, because I don't mean it that way, but I'm like an oil field of knowledge. I never know what people want or need to hear until somebody hits the point and says, this is the thing that needs to be talked about. So it's like, I know lots of stuff. I don't know what anybody wants. I would never tweet unless something prompted the tweet. And so somebody saying something to me, I'm like, oh, that's a salient point. I should bring that up. And they become the foil that allows me to make that point. I'm like, oh, of course they think that way. I've never would have thought to say that right now.
Okay, but it's not always, hey, good point. I'm going to talk about this. It's like, you idiot. Here's what everyone needs to hear.
I'm trying to cut out the name calling, but they're really pissing me off.
Okay.
Some of them are really making me mad. Okay. Not usually I don't know. Some of the small ones, it's like more like I'm mirroring their language.
Yeah, so and they don't see it, I bet.
That's okay.
Okay.
That makes it funnier to me.
Well, okay. Well, okay. I actually have another question regarding something that has just come up, and I don't know much about it. I'm going to have a letter conversation with a friend of mine about it. But have you heard of the terms radical or reactionary centrist?
I think I've kind of heard of them.
It's kind of new. But that's what...
Yeah, it sounds slightly made up.
Yeah, but it's like...
Is it me?
It's you. It's not just you. It's I think everything... And I actually would characterize...
I'm not even a centrist. It's so funny.
Well, okay.
Like, I took that freaking test, and I'm like Helen one time challenged me to the left-right axis test. It wasn't the normal one. It wasn't the compass test.
Okay.
It was some different one, and it's talking about like British political parties and where you are. I don't know what it means. And I took it, and I came out further left than she was.
Oh, interesting.
And Helen was like, "How can this be?" And I'm like, "Because you're a conservative, obviously."
Okay. Obviously.
It's like I'm not even a centrist. The problem is I don't care about politics and I don't want to talk about politics because I don't think that almost anybody has enough information to have a cogent opinion about anything political.
Okay. For our purposes of this conversation, we'll just say the role James Lindsay Twitter,
Sure,
not Jim, but James Lindsay
I'm
Twitter.
certainly I'm certainly possibly reactionary to the leftist
Yes.
ideology and occasionally to the right wing stuff.
Okay, so I don't know about the radical part, but I was even thinking that is exactly what the intellectual dark web was. It was a reaction. So I would
See,
actually
that's the
agree
thing.
with that, the reactionary centrist part. I started off that way.
So yeah, I get it. This concept makes enough sense to me to understand because I do try to wrestle with there are two sides, three sides to the thing I'm trying to do. I actually the I don't think it's anywhere formal. The informal mission statement of New Discourse is three things. It is expose, explain, articulate alternatives. Okay. So the expose part is the reactionary part. Explain part is a more scholarly thing that is definitely not reactionary. It is educational. Then articulate alternatives. So when I talk about what liberalism is supposed to be like, or what authenticity is supposed to look like, or something like that, that's the articulating alternatives part. And I will gladly confess I don't do nearly enough of that. In fact, um, I'm not even sure how to, and I'm not positive. Enough people are starting to point in that direction that maybe it is. Maybe it's time for that, and maybe it's not. There's been a definite shift, though. So certainly, the Grievance Studies Affair was an exposed project, right? And then Cynical Theories has been an explain project. And if you read to the end of Cynical Theories, it's an articulate alternatives. The last chapter is the alternative that we offer, but it's not the whole book. Is to articulate alternatives. So I see that as the model. And there is a time where these things have shifted. At one point, it was, Ben Shapiro destroys libtard with his logic and facts or something, right? And it was all expose, expose, expose. And then there came, and there is still this growing interest in how does the ideology work? And I know this because people are like, can you give me a list? We wrote one on New Discourses. Helen and I did a list of primary sources from critical race theory so I can go understand it on my own. They want to they want to understand it themselves. So that's explain is very relevant. And then there's articulating alternatives, which is to give somebody something else that's positive that they can latch onto. Now, here's the problem that I face with the articulating alternatives part. Usually, giving something that's positive looks like giving somebody something new. And it gets them excited and it's new and the dopamine happens and it goes. I don't think the answer to the question is something new. I think it is something updated and old.
Okay.
I think that the answer actually is liberalism. So it's like, I got accused of it today. Bro just wants to go back to the 90s. It was a conservative, by the way, not a woke person, a conservative.
Okay.
That accused me of that because they want to burn the country down or something. I don't know what they want to do. So anyway, I want to extract the values that were working up until the 1990s. And I say the 1990s because that's when applied postmodernism really came into being, as we called it in the book. I want to extract those values, of those liberal values that were working, and figure out how to fit them onto the new paradigm. But the underlying values are the same.
Okay.
They're identical. Colorblindness works. It works.
I guess it depends what you mean because you can't pretend like you can't see what people are.
That's not what colorblind means. That's how this whole thing is being played. Helen's very eloquent about this. I wish I could summon Helen. Helen, what?
Oh, okay. We were waiting for a little impersonation.
Epistemology. Colorblind doesn't mean not seeing race. It means not imbuing it with social significance that has consequences. So when you meet somebody, for example,
What if that's part of someone's identity? You don't want to be like, oh, that doesn't exist because it's
that's no good. That's no good at all. I think that should not even be a thing. Somebody's race should not be part of their identity,
Then
no
why
matter
are
who
they
they are.
looking back in these tests? I just tweeted about this the other day. Why do people are like who are adopted or like, just don't know their family history? Why, oh, I want to know what it is. Doesn't matter what. I do want to know. Just because I want to know. Like people
No,
who
that's
take
fine.
those
That's good.
ancestry tests.
No, that's excellent. That's very
To know
interesting
their
stuff.
identity, like to know where they came from.
I mean, it's a matter of curiosity at that point, and probably data collection for the Chinese government.
Yeah, well, yeah, I won't do one because I'm concerned.
Yeah.
But I get why people do them because they want to be connected to their roots in a way, and that's what might be a pushback
that's
towards your
fine
point of that.
because well, no. Because I'm all about the idea of there being different cultures and wanting to understand cultural heritage and wanting to understand that. I just don't see that there's a whole lot of value. It's not that there's zero, but there's very little value in connecting it to an ethnicity in the sense of a race, in the sense of biology. So let's say that I were born with the exact same genes, for whatever reason, my parents got a job, they moved in China.
Okay.
I was born in China, I was raised in China, but let's say that for some weird reason, my parents died or whatever, and I got raised by a Chinese family from a baby, right? How would I be? Culturally, I'd be Chinese. I'd speak Chinese perfectly fluently. I would dress in ways that Chinese people value. I would eat Chinese foods and prefer them, or whatever it is, or come to hate them and want to, rebel against it, whatever it happens to be. And I see this played out in other cases. I know, for example, young Chinese adopted children who are desperate to identify wholly as American. They want to escape their Chinese identity.
Okay.
They don't want to identify with being Chinese. And so maybe it would be a rebellion, maybe it would be an acceptance. But culturally speaking, I would be Chinese. But I would not be genetically, if we will, Chinese. If I took the 23andMe or whatever, I would definitely not be Chinese. There'd be no Chinese blood. I'm almost positive I have no Chinese blood. Zero. I'm willing to bet it's zero. I have never taken the test. I don't know, but I bet it's zero. Okay. So would that make me less Chinese? Obviously, this is one of the things, right, within the theory. No, of course, it wouldn't make me less Chinese. It would make me not at all less Chinese. I think the idea of tying a culture to a genetic identity is itself racism. I think it shouldn't happen. I think that when you see, for example, a white guy wearing the robe and he's got the hat and he's got the beard and he talks with a little accent that he definitely didn't have 2 years ago before he decided he wanted to become a hardcore Muslim, that the guy's a Muslim. His culture is Islamic.
Well, I know that is Yasmin. I spoke with her. She said that, but the thing is, though, Islam isn't technically a culture; it's a religion.
It is a religion.
So it depends if they're Arab, if they're identifying with like Saudi Arabia.
They have absolutely no Islam is openly hostile to the concept of race. You're either Islamic or you're not. That's it. It's just what religion you are. So if you're a white Muslim because you are, whether you converted or whether you were born into a situation where that's just the way you were raised, whatever, you're a Muslim, then there are certainly identifiable cultural features that go with that.
Yeah.
And so I think that, and I'm not saying like, oh, if I was in China that I would be Chinese because it's a nation of China. I think that I'm Appalachian. We have a culture here. It's different than, different parts, like it's different from Southern California for damn sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's different from New York for certain. And so.
Well, we all come out of Africa.
It makes sense to identify, well, genetically, of course. Yeah. And we all come from fish if you go back far enough.
Yeah.
It makes sense to identify with a actual culture. It makes no sense to say that a culture is racial because the race only has little bits to do with it. Very little bits to do with it.
Okay. I think there's more, but I don't have the arguments for it. Like I don't have this would be interesting to find someone who disagreed with you.
I can give you an example where race has something to do with culture.
Okay.
If you want. Please. But I think that it's so little. Black dudes can pull off a yellow suit. White dudes cannot pull off a yellow suit.
Okay.
Why? Because their skin color.
Okay.
You can look good in a yellow suit, a silver suit, a bright blue suit. You can look good in a lot of things. You get a guy in a white guy in a bright blue suit, he looks like a fool. You get a black guy in a bright blue suit, he's banging.
Okay, cool.
So there's a little
There's
bit
that. Okay,
because
but
all of
even
a
like
sudden the
color of
modes of
skin
stress.
depends on region where we were long enough to have evolved for that region. And people
Really
didn't
small.
mix back. People were kept to their own. And I mean, the very fact that we live in countries that are immigrant countries shows how far we've come tribally, that we are able to live in a country where we didn't evolve from. So even that shows. But then we're having troubles now culturally. Sorry, like
My belief is
tribally.
that these are mostly made up. I actually, if you're like, Jim, what's the solution to the problem? I'd say a bunch of crazy people with a very radical ideology were able to start in roughly the 1990s. It has deeper roots that we could discuss if we wanted to make this a scholarly podcast.
Uh,
And they were able to convince most of the English speaking cultures and many of now the Spanish speaking cultures and some of the other language speaking cultures of the world, but primarily the English speaking world and now dipping into the Spanish speaking world, that we were all wrong about issues of identity. Okay, so this group of very radical people were able to convince us that we were wrong about issues of identity. We just weren't doing it perfectly. We were, let's say, I don't know the real percentage, this is a made up number, we were 90-something% right about how to handle identity issues. Some people are gay, let's get over it. Some people are black, that's cool, whatever. And they were like, nope, we need to put identity first. That's literally what they call it, an identity
okay,
first model. We need to focus on identity first. We need to make it a bigger deal rather than a smaller deal, because making it a smaller deal hasn't solved all of our problems.
okay, I do agree about the identity being made such a big deal. But at the same time, like in the 90s, people who were gay were not accepted still. You
I'm
know?
not saying the 90s are the paragon of the time. I'm
It
saying
kind
that
of
the
seems like
values
it.
that we were, I'm saying, no, that the values that we were using to sort out these issues were more correct than let's make identity central to everything. And if you're going to make identity central to everything, which, okay, let's say that you want to do that. I still think it's a bad idea, but you better be open to all the identities. So, for example, I have a gay friend. Actually, I have a lot of gay friends, but I have several gay friends who have said this exact thing to me. Some are lesbians, some are gay men. They've said exactly this thing to me. If I had to be queer, I never would have come out. If I had to be queer, I never would have come out.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? It means whatever the queer theorists are doing. That guy that decided to go stand in front of, very famously in front of the police with those suspenders and his shorts and twerk in front of the cops as an act of strategic resistance, they don't want to do that. They want to live their lives. All that stuff that the Mayor Pete Buttigieg did from Indiana, where he had his suit and he was very plain spoken. He's just this normal guy, happens to be gay, married to his husband, happens to be gay also. And then the media were like, he's not really gay. He may sleep with men, or he may be married to a man. He's not properly gay.
Okay.
Why? Because he's queer.
I see that.
And you can say, you could use other words like flamboyant, or you could use actually the word queer in the sense of queer theory, or you could use performative, or whatever you want to say, to turn it into an identity politics thing instead. And so many gay people that I know have told me point blank that they would not have bothered coming out of the closet at all if they were required to act that way to do so. There are many, many black people, for example, who do not want to dive into whatever vestiges of black culture are considered authentic black culture. They want to do this radical thing like being themselves. Maybe they have this particular vernacular, maybe have that particular vernacular, maybe they dress this way, maybe they dress that way, maybe they like these foods, maybe they like those foods. They don't want to have to lean into, frankly, stereotypical black culture. They just want to be themselves. Maybe they have some elements of it, maybe they don't. You could talk, I mean, I've again, many black friends who just want to be themselves. They don't want to have to be stereotypically and politically black. And this ideology isn't just about taking hold of an identity. It says that there's a right way to be identity. If you're black, you have to be this way black. If you're gay, you have to be this way gay. if you're going to be, whatever it happens to be.
Okay, I get the
And
right to self-determination thing now that you're kind of.
yeah, I mean, it's utterly the case. Like, let people be individuals. So if you want to say, well, let's pay attention to identity and let's forward identity, I would tell you that you can read the Wikipedia entry about it, actually. There are different kinds of identity politics. If you want to even do identity politics, there are different kinds. There are liberal approaches. We saw those in the civil rights movement. We saw those in liberal feminism. We saw those in liberal gay pride. And then there are non-liberal ones. We see those in Black Power. We see those in radical feminism, especially lesbian separatism. We see those in the queer movement, as opposed to the LG. Really, it was called like the Gay Lesbian Alliance, I think, at first. So if you're going to say that there's only one authentic way to be this thing, and it has to involve, in fact, being political about being this thing, I think you've left the path of wisdom. I think that adding social significance to racial and sexual and gender and sex and identity, ability and fat, and adding social significance to these categories creates the problems rather than solves the problems. Not to say that there's a difference between being colorblind and racism blind, right? We don't have to be blind to the facts of racism. We don't have to be blind even to the facts of race. Your experience can be different, both sociopolitically. It can also be different just flat out physically. Maybe the hair texture thing is a real thing. Whatever you have to do for your hair is very different from what a Black person has to do for their hair. It's just different. And that's something that can be navigated without making it be this really dramatic, angry, divisive thing. So I think that removing social significance from the racial categories while still being able to recognize, well, yeah, there are both material and sociocultural differences. Material differences, you probably can't do anything except come to understand them and try to learn to be sensitive around them. The sociocultural ones, you also want to have sensitivity if there's historical soft spots, for example, or just like, say, racism based soft spots, like using certain words that start with N that it's like maybe that taboo needs to go away eventually, but it ain't now. Mm-hmm. Right? So, because I'm generally against these weird taboos. I think they make things worse, but we're not ready. I don't think we're ready for all of them to just, we just don't just pop them all off.
Okay.
Fine. So there's sensitivities, but there are different ways to deal with that, right? There are ways that are willing to admit the differences and look at them in an honest way, and there are ways to look at the differences and to basically get mad at them and mad at other people for them. You can see racism without seeing color, in the sense of and I don't mean like, oh, I have no idea that the person I'm with is Chinese.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't matter that the person's Chinese. And if they want to have a job, I don't care if I hire a Chinese person. I don't care if I hire a white person. I don't care if I hire a Black person. I care if they can do the job. That kind of colorblindness, which is social significance, especially where it pertains to material outcomes. If I want to meet with a person and I find out that the person's Black, unlike Robin DiAngelo and White Fragility, I don't want to assume that this is a frightening thing. I don't want to assume, oh, well, I bet they're this thing or that thing, or this stereotype or that stereotype probably holds. I just want to go find out what the person's like. I just want to meet them for who they are. If they came from East LA, as one of my Black friends did, I want to hear what being in East LA, and maybe even being Black in East LA in the 80s or 90s or whatever was
okay.
like. And
you got down the line, yeah.
Right? That's colorblindness. You can even be stereotype aware, because stereotype accuracy is also a thing, without prejudging any individual that you're going to meet by saying, oh, well, they must be like this.
Okay.
You can meet a woman and they might be this way, they might be a different way. This is the nature of statistics. I honestly think that a lot of this stuff in this theory is a failure to understand statistical analysis, statistical understanding, and then to project that failure onto everybody else and make a big deal out of it. That most people 30 years ago, I'm not holding up the 90s, I'm holding up the values that were present in the 90s that had dragged us from the 1960s to the 1990s, for example, or from the 1920s to the 1990s. And then those values suddenly strongly shifted. The values that were working so well and have continued to work suddenly shifted. And the new values, I say, are pointing us backwards rather than further forwards.
It does seem like a collectivistic versus not just individual things that I've investigated, because I try to look at things from different angles for my own self, but like for my podcast, as well as the reason why I'm doing this podcast / YouTube channel is to understand things from different angles. So in that investigation, it seems like there needs to be community with people who are different from you to take away stereotypes that you would assume. So, for example, for me, I interviewed a guy who has worked with the Native communities. I live right by a reserve. Like, I used to work went back when video stores were a thing. And that was like positive interactions actually with people who would come off the reserve and rent videos. But when I was younger, I would have Native dudes yelling at my sister and me, being like, "Hey, white girls," and we're just like, ah. Any man yelling at you when you're a little 12-year-old girl walking to the Mac store to get a Slurpee is scary, right? But I didn't really have much other than those few interactions. I didn't have a lot of interaction with people who live on the reserve, because you're not allowed to go on their land unless you can get gas from the gas station. And so I interviewed this guy who goes to a church there. He also is a professor at the old university I went to. And so you can't even find the directions to how to get to the church. It's not even on the map. But so he goes there and he started off not even ministering to them, because he was like, I don't want to be helping these people. I want to get to know them as people. I want to be friends, because that's the thing is like, don't give us your charity, because we don't want it. We if you want to be my friend, I'll be your friend. And so that was, and I've done an interview. You can look at my YouTube channel. It's there. So, but that really was something that for in Canada, that's our race relations, you can say, that need work, is with the First Nations people here. And I guess he even says that they call themselves Indians and Natives still. He's like, but when I'm around my professor friends, I'll say Indigenous people or First Nations. You know, so they're not politically correct about themselves, but I wouldn't have gone there to even learn this if it wasn't for seeing what's happening, thinking, oh, doesn't seem good, but wait, what have I ever thought about people's experiences outside of myself as a white individual? Like, I did think, I like these sort of talking with people who might be more on the social justice left, some like friends and whatever. They weren't like preaching at me and they weren't quoting theory at me, but you know, it just got the wheels turning to be like, I think I've never ever had any racism thrown at me ever in my life. And it just made me think about it from another perspective. And it doesn't have to be that, you know, I was indoctrinated with theory or anything, but it just made me think about a different perspective than mine. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that there's definitely bad ways to do it by holding it up as if it's with the power dynamics. I don't think that's healthy, but I do think that you can understand people's stories. That their story is that, like, you know, the terrible residential schools that their parents went to, and terrible abuse, and told that they weren't allowed to, that they weren't going to be good parents, and that's why you were taken away from them, you know, and you know, then having the church completely like ruin you by abusing you, and or like priests and whatever, you know. So there's like, I think that there are stories that we can hear with an open understanding that this is not our story, and that their story is very different from our story. But I'm not trying to shame anyone. It's not my fault that I'm white, you know? It's not their fault that they were born where they were born. But I'd say these talks, this sort of stuff that's all going on, for me, it's made me think about different perspectives. And maybe I should have thought of this. Maybe it shouldn't have taken me looking into identity politics to actually consider other people's identities and the way their lived experiences. I'm going to use that. Maybe I shouldn't have taken that for me to actually have thought of this before, but it did. So I don't actually think of this as a bad thing for me, because it definitely opened up different perspectives. But I didn't go all radical or anything. It made me be like, oh, okay, yeah, absolutely, my ancestors totally stole this land. Shoot, that sucks. But I'm not upset about it. I'm not upset about the history. It's just history. But we all have results from that history, so I don't know. How do I sound to you? What do you think of, what do you take from that?
That was interesting. That was really fascinating.
Why? What about it? Do I sound like woke? Honestly, depends on who's watching.
You will to a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah, it depends who's watching, because some are like, not far enough, Andrea.
Yeah, right. Definitely that. So I don't judge you. I think it's very interesting what leads people to see the need for being curious and interested in other things than what they have been. In an increasingly global world, that's of course got relevance, because 100 years ago, maybe you wouldn't have ever moved more than 5 miles from wherever you were born,
Mm-hmm.
and the people that happen to be within that 5-mile radius are your entire social world, and so it's utterly irrelevant. But now we're all on the internet. Now we can jump in a car and be somewhere completely different, on a plane and be somewhere literally completely different in a matter of hours. So it's a bit different world now. I found it very interesting, though, that you characterized it, if I want to pick one thing out. I don't really want to close read what you said, but it stuck out to me that you said that, you've never had to think of this before as a white person, and it's actually that you've never had to think of it before as a person who's never been in a more demographically varied situation. Being white doesn't matter. If you were in China and you were white, it would be different. Mm-hmm. If you were in China and you were Chinese, it would be the same. So white isn't the relevant thing. It is how much you've been around people of other ethnicities or other backgrounds. And of course, it can be easily presumed when you are only in one cultural context, that other cultural contexts, you just live unaware of them, and you don't understand that they have a different perspective, that they do have perhaps different experiences, and in particular that they have different histories and they have different ways of interpreting that history. They also have very different values. It's jarring to go to a country that is sufficiently different that they present what they call culture shock. Mm-hmm. You go to China, for example, and you start to realize pretty quickly that differently. The second, for example, if you go to a city like Beijing, you go into the subway, you realize that lining up patiently and quietly and slowly boarding the train one after another, yeah, go ahead, please, whatever, like we would do, say, in an American city or a European city, is basically not going to work. Like you may never get in the thing unless you just go. If you keep saying, oh, no, go ahead, mm-hmm. they will all go ahead. You will never mm-hmm. get there. They just have different values. In fact, they will often pull people out of the way to get ahead of people. Mm-hmm. It's just a different organization. They're also not shy about, like, where one of the things that stands out when you go to Beijing or China in general is that in indoor spaces particularly, you'll find that people can be very loud. They will just yell across the room to get somebody's attention. Like if you're in a restaurant that doesn't serve a lot of Western guests, to have one of the people that works in the restaurant just scream across the room as loud as they can over the top of everybody's head mm-hmm. at a server or another attendant working on the other side of the restaurant is totally normal. They just start yelling in the middle. Like for a Westerner, you're like, what the heck is going on? And then you can't understand the language if you don't speak Chinese. So you're really like, what the heck is going on? And they're literally just yelling, and it's it's culture shock. It's a different thing. So, I definitely agree that there's value to the kind of cosmopolitan ideals, or even in the ideals of trying to travel or trying to expose yourself to different cultural arenas. What I disagree with is not what you just said from there. And again, I don't think it doesn't need to be connected to race. And I think it's inappropriate to connect it to race. What I severely disagree with is the attempt to balkanize culturally, to say that, for example, in America, that Black Americans need to be culturally Black, or in Canada, that each First Nations tribe has to be that way, whatever tribe it happens to be, that they've got their traditions, so they have to live that way. Again, I still think that the better thing, I do actually have the value of trying to preserve what you can of the old cultures. I think that the cultural variation is beautiful. I think that there's a lot to be gained by seeing it. I don't want this kind of like melting pot oatmeal, like everything's boring and the same. I don't think that that's necessarily great. I don't like the idea of losing that history that I think is at the heart of a lot of this. I definitely don't think it's appropriate to ignore, like when you start talking about the schools or the different experiences in churches and things, where you ignore the stories that other people are telling because you think, oh, well, that's what the literature calls hermeneutical injustice or testimonial injustice, depending on the situation, that you ignore those people based on who they are or how they try to communicate their stories. That's the two different types there. So I don't think that that's valid. I think there should be listening, of course. I think that there should be trying to hear. But what I disagree with is balkanizing cultures, to try to pigeonhole them, say, nope, that's Black culture, that's white culture, they're different, they're separate. And then especially when you add a value judgment, I think that there should be pluralism, in other words, rather than multiculturalism. So we're all, these are our so here's a good example where you often find in places in kind of the US and in Canada, it's very common to find Jewish people living amongst Christian people. And often there may even be atheists, but we'll just leave it to Jews and Christians. And obviously, Jews recognize a different Sabbath than Christians. They have different holidays. They have different rituals. They have different religious presentations. They have different understandings of what God means. They have somewhat different understandings of how you form community around those ideas. And it doesn't become a hindrance to getting to know one another. It doesn't become a hindrance. So you have people who see themselves, for example, as Canadian first or as American first, and yet, well, I'm Jewish, and so here are the things I do. Oh, well, I'm Christian, and here are the things I do. And so you have this ability to where most people have, like, when I was growing up, my Jewish friends, the only thing that I knew that anything was different from myself was that they had different holidays, because they, like a lot of Jews, many Jews are very serious about Shabbat, but not all are. They just had different holidays. It's like the only thing that I knew was different. They're like, oh, I have to do this thing because it's a Jewish thing. And it's like, well, I have to go to church because it's Easter. And they're like, oh, okay. And it's like, all right. And that was it. And it wasn't this huge relevance thing to interaction or life. And there was no hindrance to the relationship between us. And we could learn from you. Oh, wow, Jewish holidays you have this value. Like, I always found it really interesting that the Jewish faith has a value that if somebody asks you sincerely for forgiveness 3 times, you're obligated to forgive them. I thought that, well, that's a really cool value. I can do that. That's a good idea, and so you can have this kind of cultural sharing rather than saying, no, you're not a Jew, you can't do that. It's like, there's something screwed up about that. And you can do this, as I have, personally with many people across a lot of different cultures, whether it's different European cultures when I've spent time in Europe, whether it's different culture, like subcultures within the context that I've been in, whether that's Black or Hispanic or, of different types, I should say, because there are lots of different ones that I've spent time with, or whether that's even, the Appalachian subculture or the hipster subculture. It's like, you can allow people to lean into their cultures. And when it's a culture like Native American cultures, which tend to have deep and long heritages, that have been long ignored. There's something really valuable to trying to preserve that and to trying to communicate that, trying to share that and say, these are these values. So there's a lot to be done in what I would consider a pluralistic sense. But when you start splitting it off and saying, and even the part where, and I understand that the laws and it's complicated and the whole thing, I'm not trying to get into that mess, but where you're like, oh, well, you couldn't go, I didn't know anything about these people because they were on the reserve and you can't go on the reserve. It's like, I've heard so many stories about where there's the failure to allow integration of different groups often creates a lot of problems.
But the whole point of the problem was that they were forced to go into these schools where their hair was cut off. Right. They weren't allowed to speak their language. They weren't allowed any more hunting. They were broken. The children were taken away and given to white families or just to the church, and then abused in the church, abused by the families. Like it was almost like an attempted. I don't even know what it was. Was it an integration? See, I need to learn this better. But it seemed like they were trying to take away their culture because they were like the heathens. But now we're dealing with the fallout of that.
Sure, I agree with that, and there's a big issue with those fallouts because of ham-handed attempts in the past to try to navigate these issues. And so for me, and that's what that is. It's a very
it was a crime against these people, but we can't change.
No doubt.
Yeah, we can't change it now, and now it's just a giant mess. And that's the only thing I can come up with is trying to. Because I don't even know about like integrating them now seems. I don't know if that's an answer either. Throwing money at them doesn't work either because the government sure is doing that, and that's not, So the only thing I can think of is individual relationships.
It's very complicated to solve problems like that especially ones that have been compounded and made very ugly and with good reasons for resentment. The question is which sets of values are going to lead to productive solutions and which sets of values are likely to lead to less productive solutions. And integration is not something that happens quickly. It's not like, oh, let's change the context to an immigrant population. A large number of immigrants comes in. This is a thing that I've spoken with many of my friends who work with Muslim immigrants about and it is nearly all Muslim immigrants from the Middle East with everything that's going on over there and just immigrants in general. And one of the big problems that they have is they tend to set up very insular communities and they don't interact.
In where I'm at. And the problem with regards to like the native cultures here is that they're literally like they would follow the herds. That their way of life doesn't exist within our way of life. Like that doesn't exist any longer. So they don't have an option there anymore.
Right. And so what happened was to summarize, I guess, as simply as possible, people who were not anywhere near equipped to try to sort that problem out as it was coming up legally in the first place did a really damn bad job of it. And there's a fallout to be dealt with that. So what do you do from here to find the relevant compromises? What do you do from here to find the
I don't even
relevant,
know if they want to be integrated. That's the thing.
Well, that's another difficulty. Enforcing integration, of course, doesn't work either. But encouraging a superordinate identity and then as much self-expression as is possible within that, plus within the confines of law, where the law is applied equally, but is also able to be flexible and to hear what needs to be heard, seems to be the set of values that works to sort things that have been made very messy and very ugly.
Well, what about in the States? Better than...
What about the States?
Oh, with the native population there.
No, we screwed that right up.
Because I know we went about things differently in Canada versus the States.
No, but
I know about the Trail of Tears. I know about the Battle of Wounded Knee. Those are two very bad things.
There's a lot of very bad things. We screwed that right up. The Trail of Tears is particularly horrific because Jackson lied to him and everything. I live in Cherokee country myself here, And up until many of my family members, I have like an Elizabeth Warren story. Most of my family, we actually have a document saying that a significant amount of our blood is Native American. And there's this story that it was somebody who walked the Trail of Tears and married a soldier that drove them and all this. Turns out the genetic testing, just like Elizabeth Warren, has shown that that's not true. So
yeah.
I feel a little bit bad for her, except that she actually manipulated it and none of us ever did.
Yeah.
So it's like
I have a story of that on my American side. Like the half-breed laid like baby that was thrown over the fence. That was.
Yeah, there are a lot of those stories.
Or whatever, yeah.
So no, the U.S. screwed that right up too. So again, the question becomes, what are the values now that work and what are the values that don't? And I think what we have to start to be ready to admit. So when you decide that, oh, well, okay, we screwed you over, so we've set up this reserve and that's where you guys have to live and that blah, blah, blah. What this tends to do, when we try to force multiculturalism, where we're going to have one polity, one people, in a political sense, but they're going to be many different cultures, and I don't mean like subcultural variations, I mean literally different cultures. You screw people over who are in the ones that are disempowered, big time. You screw them over bad. It's a failed experiment. And multiculturalism, I don't think, works at all, whereas pluralism does. And it's not to say that the process of fixing, or not even fixing, just going forward, saying, okay, this is where we are. These are the factors that got us here. Some of these contain grave injustices, some of them didn't. And we have to figure out, we can't, as you said, we can't change history. And it makes very little sense to be motivated by guilt in history. But we do need to figure out how to move forward as best we can. I still think that when we have two models that we have to stare at, one is pluralism as a value set.
Can you explain what you mean by pluralism? Like I know what it is, but I just need to know what you mean.
When I described the Jewish and the Christian thing earlier, or if you said that we have, imagine, for example, that all the people involved, all the people in Canada saw themselves as Canadian first, and then we're gonna work backwards from there, right? And so some people are Canadians who are Christian, some are Jewish, some are Muslim, some came from Somalia, some came from Syria, some came from, it doesn't matter. They're countries all over, or China, whatever. And so they say, oh, well, this is the culture that we bring to the mix. And, we value these things and we're going to honor these things. And we're going to teach our kids these things to some degree. We're going to share these at the school. And if you want to pick up some of those values, fine. It's a much more like, instead of drawing lines around each one of those different cultures and saying, nope, that's what that is. Nope, that's what that is. And it can't change. It's now saying, okay, here are these things, and I'm in my head, I'm picturing little cups of paint versus putting the paint on a surface where it can kind of blend around the edges and bleed into it, and mix.
Isn't that a mosaic? That's what Canada is, like, we're a mosaic rather than melting pot.
Yeah, I think that doesn't work.
So, but it's more contained than the melting pot, the mosaic is.
I think that the containment's the problem.
So wait, what were you? Okay, I got mixed up on what you meant by what was the? Oh, was the pluralism the letting it go?
Yes.
Oh.
Pluralism is a plurality of cultures within one culture. Multiculturalism is many cultures within one polity.
Okay.
Which is a different thing.
So here's the thing. I remember Coleman Hughes actually mentioning this about, with regards to, it's not the same, but it is like a unifying feature with regards to the civil rights movement, with how Dr. King was able to do, how do I even say it? Like, the success of Dr. King's movement, we'll say, that he went as a preacher. So Christianity, and my neighbor is my brother, So this sort of meta narrative was what could unite.
Sure.
So people,
I think that works.
Yes. And so people used to say that would unite. one nation under God, you know. Now I mean, I know, I know you're an atheist and that you wouldn't be suggesting this, but that did work. But it's, you're not suggesting this, but I'm like, well, that's what did work. So I don't know how to make something else take that place.
Well, I mean, God becomes an emblem in that case for a set of particular values that anybody could pick up. Is there any reason whatsoever that an atheist would be unable to pick up the loving one's neighbor as the self? Or is there any reason an atheist could not pick up the value of seeing each other as brothers in similar values? You say brothers in Christ, it just means brothers in similar values. I know that Christians might get their backs up at that, but that's the atheist interpretation of this same thing. And I've seen this, you know, I've gone to a lot of different.
There has to be an agreement. I've seen atheists who are like, I'm not going to love my brother. Sorry, well, brother, literally.
Love my neighbor.
But no, love my neighbor if my neighbor is an asshole. You know, like I've seen that. But that's the thing. The Christian principle is first shall be last. Let's turn it hierarchies on our heads. Like if you will suffer as I suffered and I was hung on a cross. Like, so this is what we're told as a expect this, you know? And so not all atheists would necessarily take those maxims. So there has to be maxims that will be believed by all and accepted by all, by outside of religion, then just values, I guess. And I don't know that everyone wants that value.
Right. I mean, so the value in, say, the United States context would be more or less the foundational documents and.
The Second Amendment, real easy to interpret, eh?
Yeah. No, it's serious. It's like if you sit back and you say, well, what does it mean to be an American? We have these documents that and these arguments that were had by the founding fathers, but you could turn to and say, oh, well, this is what it means to be an American. You see the politicians appealing to it all the time. They're like, oh, this is not an American value. What Donald Trump is doing is not American. This is an un-American thing of Joe Biden's un-American. You know, you hear it all the time. So there's this sense of Americanness.
Okay.
And that sense of Americanness comes from a set of values. Now, I think that certain values, of course, work better than others. Mm-hmm. And I think that some of the values of Christianity, in fact, and this is common to many religions, that within Christianity, you see it that, you know, there's neither Jew nor Greek.
Yeah. That's a slave nor free, and male nor female.
We're all one in Christ Jesus. Yeah. Within Islam, that's the same thing. You're all
one under Allah.
I don't know how they phrase it, to be honest, but they have the same value that they're unified within being Muslim.
Right.
And so this kind of a value, though, which is what it is what I mentioned in a technical term a minute ago, was a superordinate identity. The superordinate identity for Christians is being Christian. The superordinate, and that can even, it's ugly, but that can even transcend denominational differences like Catholic and Protestant.
Right.
At the end of the day, they can actually say, well, we're still both Christian, and find ways to get along despite having incredible doctrinal differences and both secretly believing that the other one's not really Christian.
But that's the point. It is. I know that you said transcend. I don't think you use transcendent in the way that I'm meaning, but it is a transcendent meta thing above. Superordinate. Yes, that's what you meant. Yeah, that's what you said. Yeah. I was actually going to be like, wait, what does that mean? But I think that's what I'm using. I'm using it without knowing what it meant. But yeah, it's because there's something above it. And it's almost thinking there's something that has a magical power above you.
Oh, it's a way of seeing commonality with one another.
It is above people, but it's above.
Well, that's one way to do it. That's one way to do it.
That has been tried and tested for many years.
I didn't say it's a bad way. It works. It's a good way.
Yes, but I don't know if the values can transcend in people's minds unless you give it a special aboveness. Superordinate, I guess is the right word. What?
Let's go together to China again.
Okay.
They do not have.
Yes, you're right. I did talk with.
But by golly, they know they're Chinese.
Yeah.
They
Oh,
know
they know they're
they have
Chinese
their
and they know who's
Confucius,
not and they know who to be persecuting right now. Yeah.
and then they have
Okay,
their
well then it'll
Confucius,
go
they have
there.
their scholars.
It can go
What's
there. It
that?
can like I'm like they are who are they persecuting right now? Who are not the Chinese people, who are different tribes that are the Muslim tribe that's in the north there.
Yeah,
That
the Uyghurs.
how do you? Yeah, I didn't know how to pronounce it.
Uyghur. Yeah, Uyghur.
Is that how you say? I thought it was Ughar. I don't remember how to pronounce it.
No, sorry, it's Uyghur.
Oh, okay.
Uyghur.
Yeah. I don't know how to say it because it's spelled. Okay, whatever. I don't know how to pronounce it. People know who I'm
It's a
talking about.
hard word to pronounce.
Yes, so those people are not Chinese. And they are being
Yeah,
treated as though they are not. So we don't want it to turn into that. And that's basically the sort of Nazi ideology of like, you're not German, so we're going to persecute.
I
So
mean,
what about things going that way?
man, I need my American flag right now because the e pluribus unum thing is a thing. Like e pluribus unum from many one,
Yeah.
which is a value of pluralism. Like
Okay.
you get to be who you are. We're a nation of
So
immigrants
that's why it
that came
won't turn
across
into
from
the
many different
Chinese thing?
places.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah, they are not. They're pretty insular.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to be German and you want to come to America and you want to still be very German and you want to serve German food and you want to do German holidays and German festivals, the idea in America is, hell yeah, let's do that. And I'm going to come to your festival and I'll probably give you money and I'll eat your sausages and drink your beer and we're going to dance around and we're going to have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to learn a little bit about Germany and you're going to learn, we're all going to have a good time and you're going to make some money and we're going to all get together and it'll be great. And then if next week it's the Polish festival, the next week it's the Chinese Dragon Festival, and the next week it's, whatever else, that's cool. But at the end of the day, every one of us is going to pull out that American flag and say, this thing that we get to be who we are with one another rather than apart from one another is what makes us American.
Isn't that multiculturalism?
No, it's pluralism.
But what? It sounds
From
like
many,
multiculturalism.
No. From many, one. From many, one. Well,
why isn't it
Not,
now? Why isn't the pluralism a thing now? If that is like e pluribus unum is literally on the money and
because the present the ideology that has been growing particularly since the 1960s has been very invested in saying maybe pluralism didn't get us all the way there. And obviously in the 1960s it was nowhere close. And so they were saying obviously we need multiculturalism. And then as the world has been globalizing, multiculturalism seems more and more relevant. How is it that somebody that lives in, say, Thailand, they have their culture and I can talk to them on the internet, and then I'm in my culture and they're completely different. How is that possible? We have to have multiculturalism. We have to have values that understand that. And the answer becomes that, obviously they're in a completely different part of the world, they're in a completely different state, and they can organize their society their way. This is what people refer to as nationism rather than nationalism, that each nation is allowed to be able to do that. It's a slightly different policy or philosophy. Whether that's right or wrong, open to debate, but it's not the same as nationalism. But within a particular country, it's the thing that you said, it's mosaic versus melting pot. And we had a bunch of people that were saying definitively, starting in the 1960s, melting pot didn't work. We're not doing that anymore. And those people have gained a tremendous amount of sway. And I think the evidence is going to increasingly point to that their multicultural experiment has failed. Mm-hmm. And the pluralistic experiment is a difficult one, but with time and with certain principles like, rule of law and so on, judging, as Dr. King put it, by the content of one's character rather than the color of their skin, with certain principles like that you can actually start to get somewhere. You can still retain your own culture, but we're also going to have shared culture. So, it's like, it's really the secularism thing. You get to keep your culture in your pocket, but we're one people otherwise. Or you get to wear it on your outfit, but we're one people otherwise.
Okay. That's
a different value than we're going to be each our own little cultures within one geographical space. Mm-hmm. So it's a people that thinks of itself as one with space for cultural variation. That's pluralism, versus people who do not think of themselves as one. They think of themselves as little separate cultures that have to be kept separate within one geographic or legal circumstance.
Okay.
And that seems not to work. That it seems
It's
just
little
to cause division.
countries almost, yeah.
It is. It's multiculturalism is a form of cultural balkanization that causes it causes people to try to identify which culture they belong in, and then to fight in largely zero-sum battles for access to resources, rather than to say, how can we help one another? How can we learn from one another? How can we share with one another?
Okay, I think that's a good. After 2.5 hours, I might split this one up. I think that's a good place to end on a hopeful
Sure.
note.
I think it can work, and I think that that's kind of like you're like, instead of criticizing, what's the positive stuff? Like, let's remember people are individuals. Let's remember that people's cultures are interesting and that we can share. But let's also remember that the sharing can work.
Mm-hmm.
That we can actually work together across difference and celebrate difference without leaning into making the difference be the relevant thing.
Okay.
The difference doesn't have to be the relevant thing. The difference can be the less interesting half of coming together across difference.
I agree, but I don't agree. It's like, oh, that's super interesting. I love hearing about different cultures and where people hail from and where that's an interesting part of you. Okay, moving on. Oh, you have another story about it? Cool. Please share it. But it's not like there needn't be a hierarchy regarding power dynamics necessarily. It could just be, I'm interested in your culture. Does that make sense? I do think it can be part of the conversation, and it can be interesting, but it doesn't have to be bludgeoning someone with it.
I think that that's exactly right.
Is that? I just tried to sum it up in my own words to understand it better, and that's how people learn. Okay. It's so good. I'm so animated because you're so like, And so we end as we began. Okay, thanks for chatting with me, Jim. This was extremely informative.
Thank you for having me again. It was a very interesting and delightful conversation, and it was fun to humanize me a little bit. Yeah. I like that you tried to challenge me on Twitter.
I know. Not on Twitter. Off of Twitter. About Twitter, exactly. Okay. A boot. Yeah, that's exactly how I say it. Boots all around.